Royal Guard screams at Camilla. After she took the late Queen's iconic Range Rover for her son, the morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of Windsor Castle as Queen Camilla walked briskly toward the royal garage. Her heels clicked against the ancient stone pavement, each step echoing with purpose and determination. She had made a decision that morning, one that would soon create ripples throughout the royal household and beyond. The garage housed an impressive collection of vehicles, but Camilla's eyes were fixed on one particular car that sat in the corner, covered by a pristine white sheet. Beneath that covering lay Queen Elizabeth II's beloved Range Rover, a dark green vehicle that had been the late monarch's constant companion for decades. The car had been untouched since the Queen's passing, preserved as a memorial to her memory. Camilla approached the vehicle with careful steps. Her heart raced slightly as she pulled away the protective covering, revealing the immaculate exterior that still bore the subtle scent of the late Queen's favorite lavender perfume. The leather seats inside held memories of countless journeys, from official state visits to quiet drives through the Scottish Highlands that Elizabeth had loved so dearly. Thomas Henley, the head of royal security, had been making his routine morning rounds when he noticed unusual activity in the garage. A tall man in his 50s with graying temples and sharp blue eyes, Thomas had served the royal family for over 20 years. He had developed an almost supernatural ability to sense when something was amiss within the castle walls. As he approached the garage, Thomas could hear the distinct sound of an engine starting. His steps quickened when he realized which engine it was. The deep, familiar rumble of the Queen's Range Rover was unmistakable to anyone who had spent years protecting the royal family. Thomas had ridden in that very vehicle countless times, always positioned strategically to ensure the Queen's safety during her travels. When Thomas reached the garage entrance, his worst fears were confirmed. Queen Camilla sat behind the wheel of the late Queen's cherished vehicle, adjusting the rearview mirror with a casual air that made his blood pressure spike. The morning light streamed through the garage windows, illuminating her determined expression as she prepared to drive away. "Your Majesty," Thomas called out, his voice carrying a tone of urgency that he rarely used when addressing members of the royal family. "Please, step away from the vehicle immediately." Camilla turned to face him through the open driver's side window, her expression remaining calm despite the obvious distress in Thomas's voice. "Good morning, Thomas. I'll be taking this car out for the day. Please ensure the gates are open for my departure." Thomas felt his chest tighten with a mixture of professional duty and personal attachment to the late Queen's memory. "Ma'am, with all due respect, that vehicle has been designated as a memorial piece. It's not meant to be driven. The late Queen's personal belongings are still inside, and the car holds tremendous sentimental value for the entire royal household." The tension in the garage was palpable as Camilla's hands remained firmly on the steering wheel. She had anticipated this resistance, but her resolve had not wavered. Her son Tom Parker Bowles was facing a difficult period in his life, struggling with personal challenges that required more than just words of comfort. She believed that giving him access to this particular vehicle would provide him with a sense of belonging and connection to the royal family that he had never quite achieved. "Thomas, I understand your concerns, but this decision has been made with careful consideration. My son needs this gesture of support from the family, and I believe Queen Elizabeth would have understood the importance of helping family members during difficult times." Thomas's face flushed red as he struggled to maintain his professional composure. The late Queen Elizabeth had been more than just his employer. She had been a figure he deeply respected and admired. The thought of her personal vehicle being used for purposes she had never intended felt like a violation of everything he stood for as a protector of royal traditions and dignity. "Ma'am, this is highly irregular and goes against established protocols," Thomas said, his voice rising despite his efforts to remain respectful. "The late Queen's vehicle was never intended for use by extended family members. This could set a dangerous precedent, and may be seen as disrespectful by the public and other members of the royal family. Camilla's patience began to wear thin as she realized that Thomas would not simply step aside and allow her to proceed with her plan. She had hoped to handle this matter quietly, without creating a scene that might attract unwanted attention from other staff members, or, worse yet, the ever-present royal correspondents who seemed to have an uncanny ability to discover palace controversies. "I am the queen consort of this realm, Thomas, and I am making a decision about a family matter. I would appreciate your cooperation rather than your resistance." The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the garage as several other security personnel, alerted by Thomas's raised voice, began to gather near the entrance. Among them was Sarah Mitchell, a newer member of the security team who had only recently been assigned to Windsor Castle. Her eyes widened as she took in the unprecedented scene unfolding before her. James Crawford, another veteran guard who had worked alongside Thomas for nearly 15 years, stepped forward with a concerned expression. "Thomas, is everything all right?" We heard voices from across the courtyard. Thomas's hands clenched into fists at his sides as he struggled with the impossible position he found himself in. His duty was to protect and serve the royal family, but his personal convictions told him that what was happening was fundamentally wrong. The late Queen's Range Rover represented more than just a means of transportation. It was a symbol of her independence, her connection to the common people, and her unwavering dedication to her role as monarch. "Her Majesty wishes to take the late Queen's Range Rover for her son's use," Thomas explained to his colleagues, his voice strained with barely contained emotion. "I've explained that this vehicle has been preserved as a memorial, but my concerns have been dismissed." The gathered security personnel exchanged uncomfortable glances, each one understanding the delicate nature of the situation. They were caught between their loyalty to the current royal family and their deep respect for the memory of Queen Elizabeth II. The late Queen had been beloved by her staff, many of whom had served her for decades, and considered her death a personal loss that still felt fresh and painful. Camilla could sense the growing opposition from the security team, and her frustration began to show in her increasingly tense posture. She had not anticipated such strong resistance to what she considered a reasonable family decision. In her mind, she was simply trying to help her son feel more connected to his new royal status and provide him with the support he needed during a challenging time. "I will not be questioned further on this matter," Camilla declared, her voice taking on the authoritative tone she had learned to adopt since becoming queen consort. "This vehicle will serve its purpose in supporting a member of this family, which I believe aligns perfectly with Queen Elizabeth's values of family unity and support." Thomas felt something inside him snap as he listened to Camilla's words. The idea that taking the late Queen's cherished vehicle for her son's personal use could somehow honor Elizabeth's memory seemed not just wrong, but deeply insulting to everything the late monarch had stood for. "Your Majesty," Thomas began, his voice now trembling with barely controlled anger. "Queen Elizabeth II drove that vehicle with her own hands for over 30 years. She took it on private drives when she needed solitude, used it for unofficial visits to see her subjects, and considered it her escape from the formal constraints of royal life. That car represents her independence and her personal connection to the people she served. To use it as a gift for someone who has no understanding of its significance is not honoring her memory. It's destroying it." The silence that followed Thomas's outburst was deafening. The gathered security personnel stood frozen, shocked by the unprecedented display of emotion from their normally composed colleague. Never in the history of Windsor Castle had anyone witnessed a senior guard speak so passionately to a member of the royal family, let alone challenge their decisions so directly. Camilla's face had turned pale, then flushed with anger as the weight of Thomas's words settled over the garage. The morning sunlight streaming through the windows seemed to highlight the tension etched on everyone's faces. She gripped the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles turning white as she processed the guard's emotional declaration. "How dare you speak to me in such a manner?" Camilla said, her voice low and dangerous. "You forget yourself, Thomas Henley. Your job is to provide security, not to lecture me about family decisions or the appropriateness of my actions." Thomas stood his ground, though his body trembled slightly from the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Behind him, his colleagues watched in stunned silence, unsure whether to support their friend or step in to de-escalate the situation. Sarah Mitchell bit her lip nervously, while James Crawford shifted uncomfortably from foot to foot. "Ma'am, my job is to protect this family and everything it represents," Thomas replied, his voice steadier now, despite the gravity of the situation. "That includes protecting the memory and legacy of Queen Elizabeth II. This vehicle isn't just a car, it's a piece of British history. The late Queen drove it to visit flood victims in the countryside, used it to surprise school children during unofficial visits, and took it on countless drives through the Scottish Highlands where she felt most at peace." The mention of Queen Elizabeth's personal connection to the vehicle seemed to strike a chord with several of the other staff members. Margaret Phillips, the head housekeeper who had appeared in the garage doorway after hearing the commotion, nodded quietly in agreement with Thomas's words. She remembered countless occasions when the Queen would slip away for private drives in that very Range Rover, seeking solitude and a brief escape from the demanding royal schedule. Camilla's anger intensified as she realized that the situation was spiraling beyond her control. What should have been a simple family gesture was turning into a public confrontation that could potentially damage her reputation and authority within the household. She could see the doubt and disapproval in the faces of the staff members who had gathered to witness the unprecedented scene. "This conversation is over," Camilla declared, putting the Range Rover into gear. "I am leaving now, and anyone who attempts to stop me will face immediate dismissal from their position." Thomas stepped directly in front of the vehicle, his arms spread wide in a gesture of defiant protection. His heart pounded as he realized he was putting his career and livelihood on the line, but his sense of duty to the late Queen's memory outweighed his fear of the consequences. "I cannot allow this vehicle to leave these premises for inappropriate use," Thomas announced, his voice carrying across the garage with surprising authority. "If necessary, I will contact Prince William and King Charles to inform them of this situation and seek their guidance on the proper handling of the late Queen's personal effects." The threat to involve other members of the royal family clearly struck a nerve with Camilla. Her relationship with Prince William had been strained since her marriage to King Charles, and she knew that involving him in this controversy would likely result in an outcome that favored the preservation of his grandmother's memory over her family's needs. "You wouldn't dare," Camilla hissed, though uncertainty crept into her voice for the first time that morning. "Ma'am, I have dedicated my entire adult life to serving this family with honor and integrity," Thomas replied, his conviction growing stronger with each word. "I served Queen Elizabeth II for 15 years, and I watched her treat this vehicle with the same respect and care she showed everything else in her life. She would arrive at the garage early in the morning, sometimes before sunrise, and spend a few minutes just sitting in the driver's seat, preparing herself mentally for the day ahead. This car was her sanctuary, her private space where she could simply be Elizabeth rather than the Queen." Margaret Phillips stepped forward from her position in the doorway, her usually quiet voice carrying surprising strength. "Thomas is right, Your Majesty. I remember how the late Queen would sometimes ask me to pack a simple lunch so she could drive to one of her favorite spots in Windsor Great Park and eat alone in the car. She said it reminded her of simpler times before she became Queen, when she was just a young woman learning to drive during the war." The housekeeper's words added another layer of emotional weight to the already tense situation. Several of the staff members nodded in recognition of Margaret's memories, having witnessed similar moments of the Queen's private connection to her beloved Range Rover. Camilla felt the tide of opinion turning against her as more staff members began to share their own memories and observations about Queen Elizabeth's special relationship with the vehicle. She had underestimated the depth of loyalty and emotional attachment that the castle's employees felt toward the late monarch and her personal belongings. "This is ridiculous," Camilla said, though her voice lacked its earlier conviction. "It's just a car. My son needs support during a difficult time, and providing him with a connection to the royal family through this vehicle seems like a perfectly reasonable gesture." Thomas shook his head slowly, his expression filled with both sadness and determination. "Ma'am, with all due respect, it's not just a car to any of us who served Queen Elizabeth. This Range Rover represents her independence, her humanity, and her connection to the people she loved. Your son may be facing difficulties, but there are countless other ways to show family support that don't involve compromising the integrity of the late Queen's legacy." James Crawford, who had remained silent throughout most of the confrontation, finally spoke up. "Thomas is speaking for all of us, Your Majesty. We all loved and respected Queen Elizabeth, and we feel a responsibility to protect the things that were important to her. This vehicle should remain here at Windsor, preserved as a tribute to her memory and available for display or special commemorative events." The growing chorus of support for Thomas's position clearly frustrated Camilla, who had expected the staff to simply follow her instructions without question. She was discovering that loyalty to the royal family was more complex and nuanced than she had anticipated, particularly when it came to honoring the memory of someone as beloved as Queen Elizabeth II. "You're all forgetting that I am now the Queen Consort," Camilla said, her voice rising with desperation and anger. "My decisions regarding family matters should not be questioned by palace staff. This insubordination is completely unacceptable." Thomas remained unmoved by her appeals to authority and hierarchy. "Ma'am, some things transcend rank and position. Protecting the dignity and memory of Queen Elizabeth II is one of those things. I would rather lose my job than stand by and watch something precious and irreplaceable be used inappropriately." The confrontation had now drawn the attention of additional palace staff, who gathered in clusters near the garage entrance, whispering among themselves about the extraordinary scene unfolding before them. Word was already beginning to spread throughout Windsor Castle about the unprecedented clash between the Queen Consort and the head of security. Camilla realized that her window of opportunity was rapidly closing. If she didn't act soon, the situation would escalate beyond her ability to control it, potentially creating a public relations nightmare for the royal family. She could already imagine the headlines in the British tabloids if news of this confrontation leaked to the press. "This is your final warning, Thomas," Camilla said, her voice taking on a threatening tone. "Step aside immediately or face the consequences of your insubordination." Thomas looked directly into her eyes, his own gaze unwavering despite the gravity of the threat. "Your Majesty, I have served this family with honor for over 2 decades. If standing up for Queen Elizabeth's memory costs me my career, then I accept that price willingly." The standoff in the Windsor Castle garage had reached a critical moment. Thomas stood firm in front of the Range Rover, his career hanging in the balance, while Camilla sat behind the wheel, her face flushed with anger and frustration. The tension was so thick it seemed to press down on everyone present like a heavy weight. Suddenly, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the stone corridors leading to the garage. Everyone turned to see Prince William stride purposefully into the space, his expression serious and concerned. Behind him walked King Charles, looking visibly distressed by the commotion that had apparently reached his ears through the castle's informal communication network. "What exactly is happening here?" Prince William asked, his authoritative voice cutting through the tension like a knife. His eyes quickly took in the scene, His stepmother in the driver's seat of his grandmother's beloved Range Rover, Thomas positioned protectively in front of the vehicle, and the gathered staff members watching with obvious anxiety. Camilla's heart sank as she realized that her worst fears were being realized. The involvement of Prince William and King Charles meant that the situation had escalated far beyond a simple family disagreement and had become a matter of royal protocol and public perception. "William, I was simply arranging for your grandmother's vehicle to be put to good use by helping Tom during a difficult period in his life," Camilla began, her voice carefully controlled as she attempted to present her actions in the most favorable light possible. Prince William's expression grew stern as he processed his stepmother's words. He moved closer to the Range Rover, running his hand along its familiar exterior with obvious reverence. "This car holds incredibly special memories for our entire family, Camilla. Grandmother drove me and Harry in this vehicle countless times. She taught both of us basic driving skills in this very car when we were teenagers, using the private roads around Windsor to give us a sense of independence and responsibility." King Charles stepped forward, his face showing the strain of being caught between his wife and his son over such a sensitive matter. "Perhaps we should discuss this matter privately, away from the staff," he suggested quietly, clearly hoping to de-escalate the situation before it caused permanent damage to family relationships. Thomas, however, was not finished speaking his mind. The arrival of Prince William had actually strengthened his resolve rather than intimidating him into silence. He knew that the prince shared his deep respect for Queen Elizabeth's memory and would understand the importance of preserving her personal effects with appropriate dignity. "Your Royal Highness," Thomas addressed Prince William directly, "this vehicle represents far more than just transportation. Your grandmother used it for some of her most personal and meaningful moments. I've witnessed her drive to visit families affected by tragedies, stop spontaneously to speak with children playing in village squares, and take solitary drives when she needed time to think and reflect on important decisions." Prince William nodded slowly, his expression showing both understanding and appreciation for Thomas's passionate defense of his grandmother's memory. "Thomas is absolutely right. This Range Rover was grandmother's personal sanctuary. She valued it precisely because it allowed her to be spontaneous and informal in ways that her official duties rarely permitted." Camilla felt her position becoming increasingly untenable, as Prince William's support clearly lay with the security guard rather than with her family needs. She had underestimated both the emotional attachment that others felt toward Queen Elizabeth's possessions and the complex dynamics of royal family relationships that still favored the late Queen's direct descendants over newer family members. "I understand the sentimental value," Camilla said, her voice now showing traces of desperation. "But surely Queen Elizabeth would have wanted her possessions to be used in ways that help family members rather than simply gathering dust as museum pieces." Margaret Phillips, emboldened by Prince William's presence and apparent support for preserving the vehicle's dignity, spoke up once again. "Your Majesty, if I may, Queen Elizabeth was very specific about how she wanted her personal items to be handled after her death. She left detailed instructions about various possessions, and she specifically mentioned that this Range Rover should remain at Windsor as a working memorial that could occasionally be used for official royal duties that honored her memory." The revelation about Queen Elizabeth's specific wishes regarding the vehicle sent a shock through everyone present. Camilla's face paled as she realized that her actions were not only going against the staff's emotional attachments, but also directly contradicting the late Queen's explicit instructions about her personal effects. King Charles closed his eyes briefly, clearly pained by the realization that his wife had unknowingly been attempting to override his mother's final wishes. "Camilla, my dear, if Mother left specific instructions about the Range Rover, then we must honor those instructions absolutely." Her wishes regarding her personal effects are sacred and cannot be altered for any reason. The weight of royal tradition and respect for the deceased monarch's final wishes seemed to settle over the garage like a heavy blanket. Even Camilla could no longer argue against such clear guidance from Queen Elizabeth herself, delivered from beyond the grave through the careful record-keeping of the royal household. Thomas felt a surge of validation as the truth about Queen Elizabeth's instructions emerged. "Your Majesties," the late Queen was very thorough in her planning. She understood that her personal possessions would be viewed as historical artifacts and wanted to ensure they were preserved appropriately for future generations while still serving meaningful purposes within the royal family. Prince William approached the Range Rover's driver's side door, his expression gentle but firm. "Camilla, I understand you were trying to help Tom, and that comes from a good place in your heart. However, there are other ways we can show family support that don't involve compromising grandmother's specific wishes or the historical significance of her personal effects." Camilla slowly turned off the engine, the sudden silence in the garage feeling almost overwhelming after the emotional intensity of the confrontation. She remained in the driver's seat for a moment, struggling to come to terms with the failure of her well-intentioned plan and the public nature of her defeat. "I suppose I misunderstood the importance of following established protocols," Camilla said quietly, her voice lacking its earlier defiance. "I was focused on helping my son and didn't fully consider the broader implications of my actions." Thomas stepped aside as Camilla finally opened the driver's door and emerged from the Range Rover. His relief was palpable, though he remained professionally composed despite the emotional toll of the confrontation. The other staff members began to disperse, sensing that the crisis had passed and normal operations could resume. Prince William extended his hand to help Camilla from the vehicle, his gesture showing both respect for her position and forgiveness for her mistake. "We all want to support family members during difficult times. Perhaps we can work together to find other meaningful ways to help Tom feel more connected to the royal family and its traditions." King Charles moved to stand beside his wife, placing a supportive hand on her shoulder despite his obvious disappointment with the situation. "This has been a learning experience for all of us about the importance of understanding and respecting the wishes of those we've lost, even when our intentions are good." As the royal family members began to leave the garage, Thomas remained behind to carefully replace the protective covering over Queen Elizabeth's Range Rover. His hands trembled slightly as he smoothed the white sheet over the vehicle, overwhelmed by the realization that he had successfully protected something precious and irreplaceable. Margaret Phillips approached Thomas as he completed his task, her eyes filled with gratitude and respect. "You did the right thing, Thomas. Queen Elizabeth would be proud of your courage and dedication to her memory." James Crawford and Sarah Mitchell joined them, their expressions showing similar appreciation for their colleague's principled stand. "You reminded all of us why we serve this family," James said quietly. "It's not just about following orders. It's about preserving the dignity and legacy of the institution we represent." In the days that followed, the incident in the garage became a defining moment for the royal household staff. Thomas's passionate defense of Queen Elizabeth's memory had demonstrated that true loyalty sometimes required the courage to say no, even to those in positions of authority. The Range Rover remained in its place of honor at Windsor Castle, preserved exactly as the late Queen had wished. The confrontation also served as an important reminder for the royal family about the complex emotions and deep loyalties that surrounded Queen Elizabeth's legacy. Her death had left a void that could never be filled, and her personal possessions had taken on almost sacred significance for those who had loved and served her. Tom Parker Bowles eventually found other ways to feel connected to his new royal status. Guided by Prince William's genuine efforts to include him in family activities and traditions that didn't involve compromising historical artifacts, the incident, though painful at the time, ultimately strengthened the bonds within the extended royal family by forcing honest conversations about respect, tradition, and the proper way to honor those who had passed. Thomas continued his service as head of security, his actions during the Range Rover incident having earned him even greater respect from both his colleagues and the royal family members who had witnessed his integrity under pressure. The garage at Windsor Castle returned to its normal, quiet routine. But the memory of that morning served as a lasting reminder that some things are too precious and meaningful to be used casually, no matter how good the intentions might be.